Coming up on Mount Hermeneutics, War of Man versus the Devil. You should keep it right here. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the Divine Council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck.
You're comparing what we do to professional wrestling.
Yes.
In a manner of speaking, sure.
All right.
In that it's entertainment. This
right.
is religious entertainment radio.
So Matt's wrong.
It 100%. Keep in mind that Mount Hermeneutics is free and available on all the podcast platforms, including YouTube. And simply, you can find us by just searching for Mount Hermeneutics, or you can just hit the subscribe button on whatever it is you're listening to right now. If this is your first time with us, I am Andre. That is Brian. That's Matt. Fellas, what's happening?
Hey, Dre. Hey, Matt.
Gentlemen, how are you?
Where's David Robinson, man? What's happening?
I'm in Chicago.
Chicago. It's my kind of town.
It's all right. It was snowing, so it's there's that.
Right. Winter vortex. You gonna go venture out into MAGA country, or
go get a Subway?
No. I will not be MAGA hats. No, I'm not going to be venturing out into
Man. You're part Asian too. You'd be a target in MAGA country there.
I don't think so.
Chicago's MAGA. That's hilarious.
I mean, he wouldn't lie.
Yeah.
Old Juicy Smollett.
Juicy Smollett, eh?
The Chappelle reenactment of that was so good.
He's MAGA hats. He's like, why did you defend him? We are defending him because we know that nigga's lying. Keep it just quiet.
How's your guys' week?
All right.
Dre, you were busy, huh?
Yeah,
I wanted to hear about that.
I worked the Academy Awards. I was on the red carpet for hours and hours. I'm too old for that stuff, I think. Let's see, notable celebrity interactions. My favorite ones. Dennis Quaid.
Okay.
Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell. And I escorted Annette Bening.
All right.
Of all, like, and she
do you get to talk to them and like, hey,
not really, unless they engage you, but most of my time was spent on the Gen Pop side of the red carpet. So you got the red carpet where the celebs come down the tunnel,
Gen Pop,
and they have to stop and do all the media interviews, and as they go, and then there's paid seat fillers that, like, and as they come out of the tunnel and stuff like that. But I'm on the side where friends and family and non-celebs who have tickets to the show.
All the plus ones and plus twos.
Is it called Gen Pop?
No, that's what I call it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's the non-VIP.
Gotcha.
Lane.
I mean, I knew what you meant. I just thought it would be really
and it's funny because even the magnetometers are set to be more sensitive.
Of course they are.
Like you could be a celebrity, like have stuff in your pockets like Mark Hamill, who's not supposed to be vaping, but he did anyway, and like Woody Harrelson, who's just dropping stuff out of his pockets as he was like hammered. It's fun. But Zoe Saldana looks pretty good in person.
She like 4'11".
I would guess.
Yeah.
I would guess she's not very tall, probably 5'3".
Okay.
But she was actually more slight than I thought she was, even though I don't know why I would think she's not slight. She's, Ariana Grande.
I think the problem is when it comes to how big people are, I think the average person doesn't understand how thin Hollywood is. So to your point, Zoe Saldana looks buff compared to that little thin chick that she was cast against in Lioness season 1.
Right.
But we don't know that Zoe Saldana is actually super, super thin. So that girl was like a POW to
Speaking
look
of
skinny
POW,
next to Zoe, right? Like
Ariana Grande, I'm like, oh,
I'm worried about her.
yeah. She was super sweet. She showed up and people were, fangirling over her, and she was super gracious and nice. I didn't know that Scarlett Johansson had a big back tattoo.
Everybody knew that.
You knew that?
No, I didn't know that.
And I was more interested in like talking to Colin Jost.
Yeah. That's where we are in the world. It's like, yo, Scarlett Johansson's here. Yo, is Jost with her? Like, the dude's funny.
I need some Michael Shea jokes, man.
What's her back tattoo?
I don't know. I couldn't really tell. I was too far, but
some kind of like kanji or something, or
so all the people, Timothy Chalamet, and
did you see Happy Gilmore in his hoodie and shorts?
Yes. Like, what are you doing?
I
think it was a shtick though. So
right, yeah. It was so over the top. It had to be.
I ran into him once in Hawaii a million years ago.
Was he in a hoodie and shorts?
Was he what?
Was he in a hoodie and shorts?
No, he was in a ball cap and shorts. He walked. It took me a second to recognize him. He walked into a coffee shop that I would hang out at all the time, and I know that guy. Do I know him from base? From church, or and then I'm like, oh, that's Adam Sandler. And as soon as I realized it, he's walking by, and I felt like, hey, how often do you get to meet Adam Sandler? I'm not, I don't work the Oscars, so I don't, I don't see celebrities all the time. And so I just said the first thing that came to mind, which was, hello there, Mr. Penguin.
It's
too hot for a penguin. And I went through the whole penguin spiel from Billy Madison, and he just walked right by me without looking at me.
He didn't acknowledge your attempt to.
But I know he heard me because everybody in the coffee shop heard me, and then they're like, what are you doing? And then they noticed I was talking to Adam Sandler, and then they all like started pointing in, hey, that's Adam Sandler. And then he placed his order, and then he went and waited in his car while his girlfriend went and picked it up. And so
he went up to the car and he's like, there's this weirdo in there that won't stop quoting my movies and trying to do my voice. I'm out of here.
Yeah. So
that kind of reminds me of the time I was at the gas station over if anyone's ever been to Camp Pendleton, over in the Harbor Drive, where the Denny's and the Chevron is right there, and this big Mercedes van pulls up, and then this ghost also rolls up, like the Rolls, right? And I'm like, the Rolls, and Seal gets out. And he had some supermodel in the front seat, and he's in there getting snacks, and I look, and this girl has her feet on the dashboard of his Rolls, and I'm like, and he's in there buying like Doritos, so I assume that this girl is gonna be eating Doritos with her feet on the dashboard of my man's Rolls Royce, and I couldn't think of anything to say to him. I'm like, man, that's Seal. He's standing right in front of me, and I'm like, hey. Just so you know, I really liked your rendition of A Change Gonna Come. He turns around, looks at me, he's like, thanks, brother. You have a good day. I'm like, no, you have a good day, Seal. You have a good day.
And by the way, your girl's got her feet on your dash.
Yeah, you want to go handle that, man. Hurry up. I guess if you're a supermodel and you roll around with Seal,
no, absolutely, you should not. So before the show, we were talking about something totally different. We were talking about, when you're single buying drinks at bars and stuff. So there's two things I've never done. I've never bought a random woman in a bar a drink. And I've never let a person, period, put their feet on my dashboard. Ever.
I cannot say the same.
None of my girlfriends, not my wife. My daughter has tried more times than I can count, and I've slapped the shit out of her every time she does it. I'm like, get your feet off of my dash. And she's like, ugh. I'm like,
But you know who hasn't done it in a really long time? I guess she grew up was you guys know her, Delani. Like,
I've heard of her.
Yeah. She which reminds me. So Memorial Day, I'm having a birthday party at the beach. Brian, you should fly out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hell so that weekend, I'm at the beach, same place where I retired. Anybody watching this, you want to show up at the beach? I'll be there.
You want Matt to come out too, or just me?
I've already told Matt. So
I called him the other day, Brian, when he didn't answer us if he was home okay.
Oh,
I snap called him already and made sure he was okay because he wasn't answering, and so we talked about this briefly.
Yeah.
I'm less offended that you ignored me for so long now that I.
Yeah, I was driving, so I wasn't really checking my stuff, and then when I saw it later, I'm like, oh man, my bad.
When I text you, I want you to pull over and text me back.
Hey, you know what? I'm feeling that. You sounded like one of my favorite red carpet interactions when Samuel L. Jackson comes strolling through.
Nice.
Just rocking a black suit, high-fiving people, dancing around. And then right after him was Ben Stiller. And I was like, no, you go back. Like, no, it was a good experience. We had a new station where there's this big red staircase that goes up to Dolby Theater, and it's a nice spot for people to take pictures. And lots of celebs stopped and took pictures. So I got Marines that are kind of lined up on the side of this red staircase that are in tons of pictures and tons of Instagram of celebrities. So it's fun experience for them since they weren't getting paid. It's all charity. It's a long day. Stand around in an ugly uniform. I got to wear a tuxedo because I'm cool, but yeah, good times.
Cool. Yeah.
Speaking of Hollywood, I mean, the devil, right?
Yeah.
So, you know what I'm saying? It's crazy because 20 years ago I'd have been like, wow, and now I'm like, talk to kids,
right?
Yeah,
and it is kind of hard to rationalize that.
The whole art scene is just people that are not my speed, right? Like their clothes, the hair, the weird mannerisms, and most of them were cool and really nice and uber talented. So yeah, it's a good experience. Kind of.
I was actually just having this conversation. I'm in Chicago for a work trip, and I was one of my counterparts that I'm becoming friends with. We went out and grabbed a drink, and we're shooting pool just before I came in here to shoot this, and on the radio or the stereo, whatever, it's in the bar that we were in, a Kanye song came on, and I was like, this guy, huh? And he hadn't heard about Kanye's new line of clothing that he's released. And so we were talking about that. Well, he brought up the thing with Kanye's wife at the other music awards. I'm assuming you didn't see them there, Dre. Kanye and his wife weren't on display.
Oh, yeah.
They were there?
She was on display?
Not the Oscars.
That's what I meant. Yeah,
but no, I didn't see them at all.
That's what I meant. I didn't know if they were at the Oscars. But he was talking about that, and I was like, "Yeah, have you seen Yeezy's new T-shirts that he's selling on his webpage?" So I showed him that. He was like, "What's wrong with this guy?" And we had the exact same conversation about how it seems like some of the most tortured people seem to be some of the most talented. It's almost like there's some kind of an extra component to their psyche that either causes them to be insane or makes them more susceptible to being insane. Although I guess one could argue that maybe it's the devil that makes them.
Colin Cowherd today was talking about LeBron James, and for all the reasons that you and I don't appreciate LeBron James, I do appreciate the fact that he's been in the limelight since he was 16 years old on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and the guy's never been arrested. Mm-hmm. He married his high school sweetheart. For all that we know, he's a good and faithful husband. Seems like a pretty good dad. I mean, he got one of his kids a deal with the Los Angeles Lakers for no reason.
And he's not very good.
Right, yeah, So
yeah, good guy.
So it's interesting because with the child actor syndrome, actors and artists are usually more isolated as their art, where sports has more of a community, especially team sports. So, if you're a basketball player, you at least have, 10 dudes that are always with you. Even if you're great like LeBron James, he was friends with all his high school teammates, and he never went to college, but he actually hired most of his friends. His agent is a buddy of his that travels in his circles. So I think sports, and just watching my own son go through his sports things, he, even athletes that weren't good are still his best friends, today. So I mean, we're talking 10 plus years of friendship, and the kid's only 26 years old. I think that might have something to do with the isolation and the weird get put on a pedestal and no one to check you at the same time, where your friends might check you if you're an athlete.
Yeah, I think that's got to have something to do with it for sure. But it's also probably a function of the way that you're perceived, right? Or the way you're treated, right? So, I mean, think about being a kid. So a kid grows up in a small town and they're the big star and everybody knows who they are because he plays football really, really good or whatever sport, right? I think probably, they go in to buy gas or they go to McDonald's or whatever. And they're like, hey, I saw what you did at the game the other day. That was awesome. And the guy's like, yeah, that's what's up. And the kid's thinking he's important. And that can be, a problem because of you don't understand that you're being judged. You're not being treated as a person based on the merits of you as a person. You're being treated as a person based on the merits of your performance.
Right.
But then when you take what happens to a true star, like a movie star, a rock star, musician, whatever, you're not just in this small town as a 16-year-old, you're a 24-year-old, 34-year-old, 45-year-old. Anywhere you go in America, the world, getting treated with that kind of adoration, it has to change who you are to a certain degree. And, we always try and say, oh, I'm not going to change.
But I think that's why I use LeBron James and not just random athlete.
Sure.
Because he's on that level. He's on
absolutely
that
people in China know who he is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I guess not all actors are that way also, as well. Also, there has to be something said about like a high school quarterback in a small town where there has to be some sort of responsibility, some sort of check where you're a leader of a team, you should act like it. You're kind of regal at the same time, where there's a way you conduct yourself. Of course, there's lots of inner city kids that do struggle with all of a sudden making money out of the blue, because a lot of athletes, let's face it, you raise a kid that played sports, it's not cheap, right? So a lot of affluent families have a lot of children so there's already a regalness about them, where others from not so much oftentimes have trouble when they first come into money.
Yeah, I would like to think, I mean, I would hope to think that some of that has to do with either the coaches, or
Sure.
parents, right? Because is that child being groomed for that level of responsibility?
Yes.
And, how they're going to represent the world? Like, specifically comes to mind Tiger Woods, the Serena sisters, right? Had, famously were being pushed, led, guided by their parents to hit their level of fame, right? So you never hear about Serena or Venus getting in trouble off the court kind of thing. And Tiger, yeah, we know about what happened with Tiger, but that was kind of more of an anomaly to his character, right? And it was certainly his family life coming crashing down around him. It wasn't him purposely putting himself in a bad position and then, getting pulled over and getting in a fist fight with a cop, or, getting pulled over with a car full of drugs or something.
And let's face it, it was at the end of his career. So sometimes it's also a coping mechanism where you are not Tiger Woods anymore.
Yeah.
You're only Tiger Woods.
That's a good point.
Right. So I'm sure that ties into
the devil. But then I think I think the difference there, so you picked the LeBron James sports. I think seems to be a lot of maybe I guess maybe it's not the case with Hollywood and or the musicians, because a lot of Hollywood stars were kind of guided by their parents to get there with, like, the Mickey Mouse Club and that kind of thing, and you got all the child actors. But it seems like in the music world, musicians don't really get there because of their parents. They're off grinding as 20 somethings living in a back of a van or whatever, trying to make that thing happen. So when it does finally hit, they feel like they did it all on their own, nobody helped them, and then they really fall off the other end. Because I think if you were to track which of those personality types have the biggest, like, oh my goodness, kind of fall off the edge of the world, it's definitely musicians. Then the Hollywood ones, and then the athletes, and that, if you talk about the rags to riches stories. But I'm sure there's plenty of people, Dre, you were trying to make the analogy into the religious part of this conversation, that would say, well, yeah, of course. Where do you think, if you were to, if I put a gun to your head and said, of the three industries, professional sports, professional music, and Hollywood, in which one is evil more present? I don't think anybody says sports, right? Also, I don't think that would be your instinct.
I think sports has something to do with drugs and alcohol as well. You can't perform on drugs and alcohol, not to mention it's banned from whatever sport. So you want to be successful, you want to make your millions of dollars, you want to be a superstar, you have to take care of your body. Where if you're an actor or a musician, it's kind of part of the gig, right? Like, I'm a drunk rock star in a hotel. I grew up in the 80s, right? I knew all the hair bands that did crazy stuff. Ozzy Osbourne, right? So drugs and alcohol, I would say, play a major role in some of the psychosis that goes on with artists, where athletes don't have that. And the ones that do struggle with drugs and alcohol, it's apparent, and they struggle with drugs and alcohol, and we learn all about it.
Because they struggle on the field also.
Correct.
Yeah.
But they don't show up for a practice, or, and it's reported, and the way that media, tracks these people now today is a different world than before.
Yeah. Brian, we're kind of coming into this sideways. I know this wasn't obviously the way you intended to have this conversation. You want to bring us back into the center of the point you wanted to talk about?
I was thinking of, like, actually just asking, because, like, I am trying to think of a way to relate that in, but this whole time I'm kind of like, I guess my question to you guys would be, like, you're talking about this in relation to the topic at hand, which is the war between humanity and the devil. Like, what's your thinking there? How is that? How are you, like, walk me through your.
Well, I think so. I think Dre was trying to make a point, and he used the sports analogy. I don't think the sports analogy holds as well. I think Hollywood specifically, and music probably to a secondary level. And I have a reason for saying this.
Real quick, my point was that sports doesn't.
Okay, so there you go.
That's how I came into this. There's that, and then like, it's interesting to me that sports can reach a level of celebrity and not be on that. And I tried to outline kind of the reasons why maybe that's true. Community, parents, lack of drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think Hollywood is uniquely kind of the devil's playground, like, because of the form of art that it is. Like, it's like storytelling. Like, humans think and reason and relate to each other in terms of narratives. That's how we get our values, how we form our identities and our sense of community and all this stuff. And, as Christians, the Bible is our central narrative, and it explains who we are in relation to God and the world, and what the point of all this is. And we kind of talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about the social media impact on the church and Christianity. But stories are our main. You can almost say that our entire, like, our central occupation as humans is to tell and be told stories. I mean, we work all day and we come home, and what do? We turn on the TV to watch our stories, or on weekends we go to movies. That's kind of a main preoccupation. But given that, like, we think of it as, typically frivolous, trivial entertainment, but it's really kind of a battleground of values and beliefs. And a lot of the West's movement away from Christianity is because we're so inundated with competing stories that tell us different, give us, you know, they kind of subtly program us with different ideas about what's true and what's right and good. I mean, you know, whatever you think about the LGBTQ, you know, movement, that our society transformed in regard to homosexuality over the past 30 years, precisely because of the, you know, the media that came out, TV shows like Will and Grace, and people like Ellen DeGeneres, who kind of you know, they kept pushing a certain message with regard to homosexuality, and that transformed our attitudes. And they're kind of trying the same thing with transgenderism, but I think so there's that, because of the role of storytelling in shaping our civilization. But also, I think being an act, and this is, you know, I'm not an actor. I've never been in that world. I'm just kind of just my own, you know, so I probably don't know what I'm talking about here. So feel free to disregard me on this. But I imagine that if you make your living like pretending to be a character, pretending to be another person, and you're like your profession is to take on all these different personas and put yourself in these different worlds. um I think you probably lose a bit of yourself, and you're probably always in a way kind of acting, you know, a certain way toward the world. You're taking on the persona that you believe people will like and will advance your career. And um so I think that probably does do something to you spiritually. That's you know, could be good, could be bad, I don't know. But
I think I think there's certainly something there to that. I don't think for actors as much as for musicians. I think rock stars have an image that they have to live in constantly.
When they're actual nerds.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about, because, you know, at least with actors, the good ones, we really don't know who they are as people, because they become these other characters so often, right? Unless they have a talk show, or unless they're some kind of you know, like Jim Carrey Jim Carrey kind of told us who he was lately, right? But we didn't know who he was for the first half of his career.
Long form interviews are helping that now.
Yeah, podcasts and
yeah,
you know, the late night talk shows, when they get them on, you know, sometimes you get an idea of who they are that you don't see on just the red carpet interviews or whatever. Right. But like, I think of, you know, we talked about, you know, music a bit on here, and I'm you know, increasingly more and more into the metal space. A lot of these metal musicians aren't very metal in real life. Like, you get an interview with like David Draymond, and for anybody that doesn't know who David Draymond is, he's the lead singer for Disturbed, and the guy is like, he sounds like your uncle when he's talking in interviews. He has a rather soft voice. He has kind of a soft personality about him. He doesn't come across as this, you know, angry, we are disturbed, and, you know, the wah, and all the yelling and screaming that he does on stage. In fact, so last weekend, Austin and I drove to St. Louis to watch the Disturbed 25th anniversary of The Sickness. And he did it on the stage. So it's at the end of the show, and he's yelling and talking, thank you for coming, we are Disturbed, my brothers and sisters, and all this stuff. And then like instantly it was like, no, seriously, thank you everybody for coming out. And he just like talked with a regular voice. So for an hour, he's been screaming and just putting on, you know, a top tier performance for a heavy metal band. And then it was like, thanks for coming out, everybody, be safe, I love you. And he just said it in his regular voice. And it was like, well, that was nice. It was sweet sounding, you know, like a little hug on the way out the door. But, you know, there's a meme that comes to mind, and you guys might have seen it. And it says, like, it's a 2-panel meme. And on the one side, it says, metal fans, and it's all these people, and they're all in black, and they've got eye makeup and all the chains on, and their fingernails are painted, and they're and all this, right?
And they're badass.
And then it says metal musicians, and it's a picture of, oh, I just went blank on his name. Oh shoot, one of the guys from Metallica, and he's in shorts and flip flops, and he's holding like Versace bags while his wife is shopping, and he's standing out in like looks like Rodeo Drive, right?
Huh.
And it's like this is like one of the guys of the metal scene, but you know he doesn't walk around in black jeans and boots and chains on 24 hours a day. And so I think there is something to the point that you were making, Brian, that you know they have to be somebody else in order to be successful in those industries. And for better for worse, I think it definitely has to take a toll on you. You know, there's all the stories of Michael Jackson and his fake voice versus his real voice that was so infrequently heard.
Yeah.
Now there's lots of stories about Tupac Shakur was an effeminate, you know, soft guy, and he only became the gangster that he portrayed after he played the character in Juice.
Bishop. Yeah.
Right, that he's like, oh, I like wearing the allure of this gangster, I'm going to be him on a regular basis. And they got him killed, by the way, so I don't think that worked out very well for him. But what were you going to say, Brian?
I was can you guys remind me of what we were talking about last week that led to this topic?
No,
we're kind of
I don't know how we segued to it.
Though I do want to go back on the narrative, right? So do you guys know what movie won Best Picture in 2025?
The one about the Mexican
Anora.
tranny.
Yeah.
The hooker, the prostitute.
So again, sex worker. So all the speeches that had to do with that movie was thanking sex workers. And
yeah, I saw that, and it was
without them, and I learned so much about these nice people. So and the director, he's made a bunch of movies about sex workers, and that's like one of his things. He wants to destigmatize sex work. He wants to decriminalize it. And a lot of people do. A lot of libertarians want to decriminalize sex work.
Decriminalize is very different from destigmatize, though.
Yeah, because right. I'm actually, I think we should do one of those, but then do the opposite of the like. I think, and like well, I don't want to get into that. That's a whole other podcast. But
for Hollywood, for a movie that nobody saw, I think I got like the numbers. Like it's the lowest grossing Best Picture box office, $41 million. So it made $41 million in today's box office.
Yeah, nobody watched it. Nobody cares about it.
Picture,
but it advances values that they want to advance, and so they're rewarding it.
And that's kind of my point when you were talking about narratives and where that goes. Like and the same with Amelia Perez, that was kind of the front runner until its star got caught with a bunch of tweets that were anti-Hollywood, right? So
yeah,
and actually I kind of want to hang out with that person because it seems kind of based for a transgender, kind of very Caitlyn Jenner of her.
Yeah, I think we need to back up a bit and kind of explain like how this stuff counts as warfare, though, because I'm not sure that's immediately clear.
I still think we've got there yet.
Yeah. We don't have to back up. We have to get there.
Right. Well, like this is kind of last week. The point that I made was that it's typically thought, and we think of it in terms of a the war of human history as being between God and the devil, and we're kind of the humanity is the objective, and I think it's more correct. It's more biblically correct, and this is not a trivial distinction. It's not between God and the devil; it's between humanity and the devil. And I think that error is actually kind of costing us the war. Like humans don't really know that we're at war.
That's interesting.
We're kind of we think of ourselves as sort of passive non-combatants, and so that's kind of why we're losing. But I think we need.
What do you think the war is about? What is the goal here? from
That is
the devil in scare quotes?
that is a very good question. And I think to answer that, we kind of have to go back to Genesis and lay the groundwork for what the design was supposed to be and kind of see how it changed. And it's like I've talked about this before, so I'm trying to avoid doing like a whole like, you know, presentation on it. But and this is part of why we don't understand the nature of the war or where the battle lines are drawn. When we read the book of Genesis, chapter 1, what we see is God setting up creation as his temple. You get that from the language of the seventh day where it says God rested. Like if you read that's temple language. When you read the Psalms where it talks about the temple of God, it's described as God's resting place, and it's kind of it's tough to explain to a modern audience, but in the ancient Near East, they would have read that and immediately understood what was going on. That this is God inaugurating, and this is in John Walton's Lost World of Genesis 1. The whole thing is about that. So if anybody I recommend him all the time. Can't recommend it enough. If you haven't read that book, read it. So God sets up creation as his temple. A temple in the ancient Near East was understood to be a microcosm of the world. And the idol in the temple represented that deity ruling over the world. In the book of Genesis, where God is setting up creation as his temple, the idol he places in the temple is man. That's what it means. That's part of what it means that we are made in God's image. It's often thought that God wanted us to rule alongside him or kind of like be his like apprentice rulers over creation, but that's actually inaccurate. God wanted to rule through us. Like humanity's presence in creation is the presence of God in creation, according to Genesis 1. We're not identical to God in the ontological sense, the way that Hinduism argues, but we are God's presence in the world in a representative sense.
I think that's. Hang on, Brian. Let's pause on that for a minute. There's a lot there. And I don't disagree with you, by the way. So yeah. I just want to make sure we camp out on that for a minute. So the language you're speaking to is like the whole concept of being an image bearer or made in his likeness, right? Yeah. And I think you're making a really strong point that we tend to just overlook. We don't really, we kind of yada that part of the Bible, to be quite honest, right? We just kind of, we read it and we're like, oh yeah, we're made in his image. Well, but nothing else was, right?
Yeah.
To include the angels.
I think I might disagree there.
Okay. Bring it.
And I think the angels are made in his image. I think that I think that the angels are our older brother or older siblings in this divine council. I think that Adam was the first of our species, and I think the big brothers might have been a little pissed that we were given the earth, and I think that might be what the war is about.
So I disagree with this. I wildly disagree, and I have a reason for it.
We're kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, though. Like that does come up later, but I do think we need to. I kind of agree with Dre a little bit on this. When God said, "Let us make man in our image," in the image of God, He made them, male and female. He made them. Who was He talking to?
I get it, but we are a more perfect version of God. So here's my take, and I can say this briefly. What I've recently. What I've come to build as I'm trying to make sense of Genesis specifically, is the whole concept of Genesis 6 and the Nephilim. What strikes me with this is, can angels not reproduce on their own? Why did they need human females, right?
I have an answer.
So I have two different answers that I would say. One is angels are all male, so they can't reproduce. That's why they specifically needed women, humans. I think that's too simplistic of an answer. I think that when God made us in his likeness, I think what that thing was the ability to create life And by creating life, I mean pneuma. I'm talking about souls and spirits and that part of the world.
We were given a special gift.
Which is why the Nephilim were so problematic, and which is why demons exist, because they weren't supposed to be part of this environment, but they only were created through us being our women. But that's how I've kind of reconciled us being made in his image in Genesis 6.
That was a side effect in Genesis 6. It wasn't their motivation. Like their motivation was just sexual desire for women.
Maybe. I mean, we don't know that we're reading that into it. Well, no, right? We don't know.
Well, it says that in the text that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took of them as wives, any of whom they chose. And then
that doesn't say why. It said that they did.
That's the language. So A&E language spoke that way. Yeah. If somebody wanted to have a kid, it would say he found her beautiful and took her as his wife. But that's getting to the, that's like saying, connotation versus denotation of what was going on. I mean, that's what they did in the literal sense, but what's the, why, right?
I have arguments, but I kind of feel like we're getting off into the weeds a little bit, and I don't want to
weeds schmeeds.
So my take is this. Back in the day when empires ruled, and they wanted to take over a new land, and they would send a regent, and that regent would bring, I don't know, a coin or a flag or something that bared the image of the emperor. Mm-hmm. And with that came the power of the emperor. Mm-hmm. In other words, with us being God's image bearer, we come with the power of God for this planet or for this realm that we're holding dominion over. Which means that if anybody tried to usurp that by means of force, like if somebody came and tried to take the colonies, then the entire British Empire would come over and beat that ass until it was settled again. So in order to not, incur God's wrath in a war, what they wanted to do was taint the bloodline and have us give it over to them. So it wasn't that. So that's
your reading of Genesis 6. You mean?
Yeah, right. Okay. So by the Watchers coming down and like, we want this planet, but we can't take it because like we'd be in a war and we'd lose. But if we can get Adam or mankind to just give it over, kind of how we are today, just handing it over to them, and if we can create a bloodline that is hybrid, then we would have a stake and we would have a line that could say that this is also our dominion, because they allowed the bloodline to get tainted, which is why we had to start over with Noah.
Well, I think it doesn't say any of that, though. It's kind of, I mean, that is, you recognize that's speculative.
That's speculative. I think there's other stories and other ancient Near East that kind of they might corroborate that. I have homework to do, obviously, but
but it's funny because both of you disagreed with me, but you're on like two ends of the middle of the point that I made.
Yes,
right. Yeah. Brian's like, no, they just wanted them because they were hot, and Dre's like, no, they had this grand master plan about taking over the universe, and I'm like,
because God declared that that the woman Eve would bear the child that would destroy them.
Well, right. And I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think there's like a whole, like Matt wanted to camp out on Genesis 1 for a minute, and then you guys are fast forwarding like 5 chapters.
I think it's a derivative of it, though, right?
Yeah. Have you been on this show before?
But there's
go ahead. Make your point then.
Well, yeah, but quite a lot happened between Genesis 1 and Genesis 6 to make it even possible for there to be Watchers descending on Mount Hermon to father Nephilim, which is so just to to explore the whole.
A snake happened. Spoiler alert. That's what
Well,
happened.
Well,
so
a Nahash happened.
uh yeah, the Hebrew is Nakash. But
Right.
so man is made as God's image, given dominion over the earth, and it's important to kind of home in on day 6. God says, "Let the earth bring forth cattle and creeping things, living creatures of every kind." And it was so, and the earth brought it forth, and they each reproduced according to its kind. And then he made man in his image, and the Hebrew for man, of course, is Adam, which is a derivative of Adama, which means of the ground, of the dust. So there is an emphasis there on the fact that just as the animals had come forth from the earth, so is Adam. Like Adam is uh, of the dust, just as they are, but uniquely made in God's image, given dominion over creation. And then you and Genesis 2 is often treated like a separate tradition, but it when you kind of when you home in on what's going on there, it's actually it builds on Genesis 1 so well that I it's pretty seamless really, but it's just that we kind of miss the themes because we're reading it as foreigners. But we have God setting up creation as his temple and giving man, but man is the image in that temple to whom he gives dominion over the earth, including the animals, including and especially the animals. And then in Genesis 2, he puts him in the Garden of Eden to tend it, and he gives him the woman. You and you kind of see him continuing God's process of creation, just like God spoke order into creation to inaugurate it as his temple, and then he brought the animals to man to see what he would name them. So Adam is continuing God's work of he's not creating ex nihilo, but by naming the animals, he introduces another dimension of order to creation, and that's also an exercise of his dominion over the animals. And so
Mhm.
that's a key thing to home in on. Adam had authority over all of the animals, and this is established on no uncertain terms. Um, given the woman who would later be named Eve, but we can't call her Eve yet because that's not her name. She's just the woman. But then, of course, as you guys mentioned, Genesis 3, that they're in the garden. They've been told you can eat any fruit in the garden except for this one, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat of it, you will surely die. Um, and so they're in the garden, and then the serpent is not introduced as a divine being. He's not. It doesn't say the devil or Lucifer took on the form
Right.
of a serpent. It just says now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals that the Lord God had made, and he went in and said to the woman, "Has God really said, you shall not eat any fruit in the garden?" Um, and we've been through all this before. If you're not familiar with the story, I recommend reading it. But like the um the thing to home in on though is that Adam had the authority in that situation. This was one of his subjects, the serpent. Of course, ancient people understood as well as we do that snakes don't talk, so this wasn't just an ordinary, like they immediately understood that it was a divine being, even though it doesn't say that. The text itself emphasizes its creatureliness, though, so we can't get away from that. But the
It
point
does.
I don't think it does. It only
now,
says the snake as a throwaway, and it never references it again as a creature
well,
And
until
and
God
and and and
makes
it,
its
it sounds to
punishment.
me that it's more like using Nakash in the adjective or verb and not noun. In other words, like if you're a car salesman and there's this image we create that he's greasy or slimy, and where Nakash means a beguiler, liar, deceiver, right? That's
well,
that's not saying that he's an actual snake. And
the text
also it also has it says, well, what's the text say then?
it says that the serpent was more crafty than any of the other wild animals that the Lord God had made. So it's like the text itself. And again, I'm agreeing with you that it's not merely a serpent. Like again, like it's implicit in the text that it's a divine being because snakes don't talk, but there is an emphasis here that this is, whatever else we think, this is a serpent who is included in the category of creatures that God had just made on the sixth day, and that to whom that Adam had dominion over. So this is one of Adam's subjects as the ruler of earth. That's the only point I'm making. I'm not trying to argue that it wasn't the devil, that it wasn't a divine being. That's all implicit in the fact that he was talking. But if
So
we
you're saying it's an actual snake? Snake talked.
I'm saying the text says that the serpent was craftier than any of the other wild animals that the Lord God had made. So it's in this category of animals that the Lord God had made. So it came in as a serpent.
I don't agree with that, the way you're reading the words.
Okay. What do you
mean?
So literally the word, the
3:1.
the sentence says, now the serpent, and I'm reading, by the way, this is the NIV.
Right.
It's versions matter. The serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made.
Right.
So if I'm going to be really pedantic, very, very hyper literal, it simply says it was more crafty than. It doesn't say was the most crafty of the animals. It says the serpent was more crafty than any of the animals the Lord God made. It doesn't actually say the Lord God made the snake. I'm not saying he didn't, just to be clear. But the words in the way they're written in this sentence do not say he was an animal. It says he's more crafty than the animals.
Why would the wild animals the Lord God had made be a basis for comparison?
That's a different question. I'm simply saying to be dogmatic that that's what it says. I don't think that's true. I agree with your secondary question that if you're going to broadly consider this against the other words, that is an assumption to make, but it doesn't actually outwardly say that.
But are there no other images throughout the whole Old Testament that are not in the literal sense?
Well,
I mean,
again, I'm not arguing.
It's wordplay for sure, and I don't think a serpent could have beguiled. I think that we don't give enough credit to antediluvian humans as if they were just fucking, stone bangers, and I think they were superior to us, that they had powers and stronger and like they're original. I think that evolution has devolved than evolved, but I guess that's another conversation.
That's certainly a different conversation.
Yeah.
Just reading the text, if you've never read the Bible before, if you're just taking it on its own terms as presented, and you're not trying to read into it any kind of theological assumptions, you don't have an agenda, you're just reading the story and taking what it means. Clearly, I think it's pretty clear that the serpent comes from that category of.
I would agree with you,
but that's not how we're supposed to read the Bible,
right?
So,
let me finish my point. Okay. If you're just reading it on its own terms, without projecting any kind of theological point onto it, the basic, straightforward face value meaning is that the serpent comes in as a wild animal, but it's the most crafty one. But then, of course, it's talking. We know, and they knew just as well as we do, that snakes, as a normal matter of how snakes operate, they don't talk. So yeah, the reader understands there's something special about this snake. But then, of course, and when you read it in the context of ancient Near Eastern literature, snakes do have, they're pregnant with symbolic meaning. Snakes, dragons, sea serpents, these are all immediately recognizable as chaos creatures. when you read pagan literature, there's typically at an intermediate stage of the pagan religion's development, you typically have a story about a storm god doing epic battle with the dragon and then slaying the dragon with its lightning weapon or its wind weapon. You've got Indra slaying Vitra in the Veda, in the Rig Veda of Hinduism. You have Marduk slaying Tiamat in the Enuma Elish. You have Baal slaying Leviathan or Yam. You've got Zeus slaying Typhon, Thor slaying Jormungand with the Midgard serpent. So this is kind of a universal symbol. Dragons are chaos creatures, and the storm god gets promoted to become the king of the gods by doing epic battle with the dragon, and then fashioning the earth, or in the Enuma Elish, it's the heavens and the earth. He fashions from the carcass of Tiamat, and so he kind of gets promoted to creator god in that regard. And so you kind of have that same language at play here. But you have to start with just the face value meaning of the text, and then you're being aware that these symbols are there. Then it takes on that meaning, but you can't just go into it assuming that before you've read the text. But I think the point here is that in contrast to those other creation myths where the creator god does epic battle with chaos in order to take his position as ruler of the world, and he's basically a personified force of nature. Let me just back up a little bit, and we're gonna
hang on. You need to let us respond to what you said, because we were in the middle of a disagreement, and you've talked now for a couple of minutes.
And you said make your point, and I
still don't. So I agree with what you said broadly. Okay. The problem is all the things that you said essentially have to be understood to read one sentence properly. And for me, the problem, I don't know why I tried to turn that to a different kind of word. The problem is that we've oversimplified the word to be snake. So when you ask the question, if you were just to read this with no previous theology coming into it, it's obvious he means an animal. But the word doesn't necessarily mean snake. Right? The original word has a lot of other meanings to it. And that, when you bundle it with all of the ancient Near Eastern precepts that you just rattled off, I think, yes, you come back around to it means something special and unique. But my problem, as I've stated a lot of times with some of this reading that we do and the interpretations, there's a whole lot of, well, you have to already know all of this just to read the first sentence of the 3rd chapter of Genesis, and for it to make the kind of sense that we want it to make so that we can move forward.
If you read it by just the words, as you say, take it on its own terms, well, no wonder atheists make fun of you.
Right. That too.
I mean, really. They would get to the 3rd chapter and be like, "This story is stupid," or "It's fantasy," or it may as well be the Chronicles of Narnia, or fucking Lord of the Rings, right? It may as well be that. And
I think they brought that attitude with them, though, when they do that, though.
Regardless, if they read it on its own terms, a snake deceived the first woman of the planet.
And to the point you made, Brian, I think is relevant. Not only did the readers understand that it meant it wasn't a regular snake, why didn't Eve go, the hell? why wasn't that the next sentence and Eve was greatly surprised by the ability of this snake to speak? Like the fact that's
snake. I was talking to God yesterday.
That none of that's even covered in this makes it a very odd scenario, right? Because we have no expectation that the other animals spoke back then. Right. I've heard people say, well, maybe Adam and Eve just had this psychic ability to communicate with all the animals, and we lost that, when they ate the fruit. That's a different argument. I don't know that I agree with that, but it's interesting.
Well, my only point is that you have to start with the plain meaning of the text. You can't bypass that, and then whatever else it means builds on that. And what you get in the plain meaning of the text is you have this sequence of God creating the world, creating man in his image, setting him over creation as its ruler, as God, as the image of God, and that dominion included the wild animals that had been created prior to Adam that came from the earth. And he is also of the earth, but he is God's image among those earthly creatures. And then you have one of these members, one of these subjects of Adam that is among the wild animals coming into the garden. So the serpent didn't go in as, the greatest of God's creation to lord it over man and to make demands or to intimidate him. He came in as a subordinate to Adam in order to, and in contrast to those other myths have basically sets up nature as absolute. The universe is always existed, always will. The gods are components of nature. They're personified natural forces. And then at the bottom, you have man, who is subordinate to the gods, to nature.
I agree with all that.
In Genesis 1, you have, it's God who is ultimate reality, creates nature as subordinate to man, and it's man to rule over it. So this is actually a pretty, just in that one chapter, and you can't, it can't overstate how profound what a profound statement that was in the ancient world. We kind of take it for granted today because we have space shuttles and microwave ovens and we can fly and go into space and stuff. And so of course we're masters of nature, but we only became that by finally getting a hold of what's being said in this chapter. Like, that's why the scientific revolution could have only happened in the West. And also that's a part of the war that we're talking about.
That's an interesting take that I'd never thought about before.
Right.
But I don't hate it. In fact, I think it's dead on balls accurate, to quote Mona Lisa Vito.
Okay. What, like the part about which part? I said a lot of things.
That's why Western civilization could make scientific leaps.
Yeah.
Because they understood themselves as being holding dominion over nature and not the other way around, where other cultures wouldn't have even thought that could be possible because
they're too busy
to them,
praying to rain and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so since nature is made up of a whole bunch of individual autonomous personified forces, they've all got their own wills and temperaments and can't predict it. It's just whatever nature does. Right. It's whatever mood Zeus is in that day, that's going to determine how your day goes. But yeah, so rather than in these ancient, these pagan creation myths where the creator god has to like put himself at risk and do epic battle with a dragon in order to subdue chaos and create the world, you have God just speaking it into existence, and then and it obeys him. And then you have Adam as his image bearer, naming the animals and exerting his authority in that way. And we've kind of talked about this before, the role of language and abracadabra, all that stuff. So I'm not going to repeat it, but I have a blog article. If you're unfamiliar, we'll link it. But when the chaos creature does enter into the narrative, it's not as this huge menacing beast. It's really kind of as more of a pest. It's just he's not there to threaten the life and limb of Adam and the woman. He sows chaos by undermining his trust in God, tricking him into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thereby getting Adam to betray God. He did that by getting Adam and the woman to distrust the character and motives of God. It was his line of attack was basically, he's holding out on you. He doesn't want you to do this because there's this great thing that'll happen that he doesn't want you to have, because he doesn't really care about you. He wants to keep you.
In fact, he's a liar. He said you die.
Surely
you're not going to die. You're not going to die. You're going to become like him. And he doesn't want that.
And in truth, and ironically though, the serpent was telling the truth. they did become like God, knowing good and evil by eating the fruit. And in fact, they didn't die. It's almost like the serpent understood that God is merciful and he's not going to he's gonna provide another way in order to satisfy his pronounced sentence without actually killing them that day, which he gave them coverings of skin to cover their nakedness, which means something died that day.
It's interesting because well, they talk about the devil's a liar, and I don't see any lies. It's deception isn't necessarily a lie, and that's I think that show Lucifer that was on Fox and then later on Netflix, and that was like kind of one of the things on there, like he can't lie. So whenever he's asked a question flat out, he's like, "Oh, I'm the devil," and then no one believes him, right? So every time he's asked a question, and then finally, like his love interest figures out that he really doesn't ever lie, so she asks him pointed questions all the time, and it's an interesting little motif throughout the show. That's a different take on what we call Satan. Deception isn't, but without lying, he just tricks you by telling you the truth.
He insinuates that God is not as good as God really is, and getting you to believe that, he basically gets you to act on that by telling you things that are kind of technically true. It's, they did become like God, knowing good and evil. They didn't die because he knew God. Or I'm speculating. I don't know that he knew that, but it seemed like, they didn't die. But what God did say, of course, he confronts Adam, who told you you're naked? Did you eat the fruit I told you not to eat? And then Adam blamed the woman. This woman you gave me, she made me eat it. And then he asked the woman, and she said, well, the serpent deceived me. Then he said to the serpent, cursed are you above all livestock. Hold on,
he's like, damn it.
This is kind of the all important passage to this whole thing. So I'm going to read it. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. Again, Adam, his name means of the dust, taken from the dust. The animals are taken from the dust. Michael Heiser, actually, there's a clip that was going around recently of Dr. Heiser talking about what, the meaning of this kind of imagery about him crawling on dust. It's kind of evocative of death. Mm-hmm. People die. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return, which I'm going to get to in the case of Adam in a minute. But there's connotations to that, according to Dr. Heiser, of cursed are you above all livestock, and you will crawl in your belly eating dust. This is kind of consigning him to the underworld as the kind of the Lord of the dead. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. And so that's where we get the war between humanity and the serpent. It started right there in the garden. I will put enmity, hostility. I think the Hebrew, I forgot the word, but it just translates as hostility and enmity. There's not a lot of variation on it, but it's basically
start using that word in like sports clips.
Enmity, or the Hebrew word for it that I've forgotten. But
yeah, I'm gonna figure it out.
But this is actually the first prophecy in the Bible. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. He will crush your head, and he will strike its heel. Of course, women don't have seed. That's typically men. Like there's kind of a double entendre there. In the first sense, there's enmity between. Actually, there's a triple entendre there. There's the sense that, like, literal serpents will strike at the heels of humans, and we will stomp on them to avoid it. There's that, but there's also the enmity between humanity and the devil. But in a more acute sense, there's enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Women don't have seed. That's something that, men carry the seed. But in the ancient idiom, it was women were kind of seen as the field in whom the men planted the seed. So this is somebody who will be born of a woman in a unique way, who will be the mortal enemy of the serpent.
So there's no seed; it's the virgin birth, right?
Right.
It's kind of getting at.
That's what it's getting at. And so after that, we find that by the time the devil is mentioned again in terms of being a serpent, it's in the book of it's the end of the Bible. It's in Revelation 12. He he entered the garden as a pest, but he left a dragon. He left as this at least he became this menacing, powerful figure who now owned the world, because Adam had effectively given it over to the devil by trusting him. Adam had been given dominion of the world. Adam gave it to the serpent by obeying him. And so that's why later on, he's called the prince of this world, the god of this world. When he tempted Jesus in the wilderness, and he told him, he took him to a high place and told him, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said, "These have been given to me, and I can give them to whoever I wish. I'll give them to you if you bow down and worship me." He wasn't lying there. He really did own them, and he is, throughout the New Testament, referred to as the ruler of this world. And so, yeah.
What is his seed?
The seed of,
you kind of explain that, but what does that mean? The serpent seed.
I think it just means all who follow him, all who belong to him. And
could be the Nephilim.
Which was what I was getting at, like kind of.
Well, he's not mentioned in the Book of Enoch as having involvement in that, but it seems to be.
But it could be those of his ilk, right?
Sure.
You people.
Because of the angels.
Yeah. And so, and we talked about that already, how the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon and sired the Nephilim that led to the flood. But then with the tower, so you've already got
I love the word sired. I love that. Sired them. I'm a grandsire myself.
Congrats, man.
But go ahead.
Yeah, and so we've talked about the Watchers on Mount Hermon. According to the Book of Enoch, they were cast into the abyss, and so they're not really involved anymore. But then after the flood, you do have this situation in which the devil is ruling the world. That doesn't change from the flood. But to what extent does he rule the world? We don't really know. But by the time we get to Genesis 11, when they build the Tower of Babel, there are all kinds of narrative cues that, as we've all discussed, this is humanity trying to kind of recapitulate this scenario from Genesis 6 of Mount Hermon, where the Watchers descended to Mount Hermon and they swore this pact to go through with this plan to leave their station and take mortal women as wives. Like you have in the Garden of Eden, you have the woman tempted by the divine being. In Genesis 6, you have the divine beings tempted by women. In the Book of Enoch, it expands on this and explains how, along with taking mortal women as sexual partners and siring the Nephilim, they also gave all this forbidden knowledge to humanity that led to our further corruption, leading to the flood. God wipes everybody out except for Noah and his family. They emerge and repopulate the earth, and then humanity gathers in the plains of Shinar to build the Tower of Babel. There's all kinds of narrative cues that this was for the purpose of trying to that they were trying to build a ziggurat, which that's what the Tower of Babel was, which is a man-made sacred mountain that the gods are believed to descend upon in order to enter the temple that adjoined it. So this was essentially them trying to reinstate that arrangement, getting the gods to come down and Father Nephilim to be their warriors and their idols, and to give them this forbidden knowledge. And so God disinherited the nations, gave them over to these lesser gods whose favor they sought. And this is where we get the divine council, this council of divine beings that rules over humanity. They eventually turned corrupt themselves, as we read in Psalm 82. But so the present state is, basically the nations of the world are under the dominance of these divine beings. Which, this is all kind of background information that we've all discussed, but the kind of the point that's worth homing in on is that, as I mentioned, the conflict is not between God and the divine council, it's between humanity and the divine council and the devil. And so, yeah, I've been talking a lot. And
you have, a couple of things popped into my mind. One's off topic subtly. Mount Hermon. So you mentioned the ziggurat, Tower of Babel. Mount Hermon isn't mentioned in the Bible relevant to the situation Genesis 6. That comes from Enoch. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I just off the top of my head, I just couldn't remember that. I was trying to think of that. I know Mount Hermon's mentioned in the Bible. It's a biblical place name, but it wasn't. It didn't have any.
The transfiguration was there, right? And
that's theorized. It doesn't say it. There's reasons to lead you to think that. Yeah. But it doesn't specifically say that's where it happened.
Yeah, but it's worth noting though that it's, the fact that it's called Mount Hermon, like that's not limited to the Bible. That's what people called it back then. Mm-hmm. And it meant like Hermon meant like a taboo or sacred in a sense. So just the geography of the region and the place names that the people of the time gave it indicated that this was a special mountain. And you get some of that you get a glimpse of that in the Bible, even though it doesn't. Probably the only place it's really explicit that this is a special mountain is in Psalm 68, which we've talked about, where Paul quotes it in Ephesians 4, and it's all about this kind of rivalry between, and which ironically I said it was explicit. It doesn't mention Mount Hermon by name. It mentions the Mount of Bashan, which is the surrounding region. Like it can only mean Mount Hermon,
right? But
it's all about this rivalry between Mount Hermon and Mount Zion as the place where God would dwell. And God coming to dwell in Zion is seen as this victory over the mountain of Bashan and its constituents.
And everyone knows that Zion's in Utah, so
yeah. And so, yeah.
I mean the overall premise that you're suggesting, I think, makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's funny, really, if you think about it's when you say it out loud. When you said it last week, and we've talked about doing it for the show, and it's not really a battle between good and evil; it's a battle between us and evil. At first, when you say that, it's kind of like,
be careful, let's call us good, right? Like,
well, that, but it's funny that the average person, average Christian, the average Christian adjacent person would initially push back against that, right? They'd be like, no, it's about God and the devil. It's good versus evil. Well, we've really created that narrative on our own.
I've always struggled with that even as a child, because that puts the devil on the plane with God.
That's where I was going. That's exactly where I was going, is that, it's easy for us to think about it because it's yin yang, even like Spy versus Spy, the old cartoons, right? The black one and the white one, but yeah, exactly. That's something that I think I'd mentioned it maybe last week on the show, maybe 2 shows back, whatever. But one of my big challenges in the last few years, as I've really been kind of evolving my internal theology, was this idea that the devil was omnipotent at some level like God, right? Like we've done that in our own, storytelling that we do just as humans and Christians in the last, I don't know, however many years. I don't think, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I don't think even in the New Testament. So I find it striking that in the Old Testament, they never say the devil. It's never said.
Well,
that doesn't come up until the New Testament. But I don't believe that when anybody references the evil one or the devil, Satan, whatever language is being used, I don't think it's a singular entity. I read it as being generic as a placeholder. I do think the Nakash was one specific divine entity, but back to this, bringing this whole point full circle, to focus it all on one single divine entity that has decided to rise up against God, and God isn't able to strike it down and just make it go away, creates this weird circular, unintentional belief system that the big bad guy is God's little brother and can stand toe to toe with him at some level.
I agree with that. I don't think I agree with how you got there.
That's fine, as long as we got to the same place.
Like I think relative to us, the devil is omnipotent and omniscient.
You can't be omniscient relatively.
I'm using the terms very loosely. It's kind of like, God is infinite, but if you're standing at the edge of the ocean, it may as well be infinite to you as a finite person. Like, the devil is finite. He's a created being. I don't pretend to know what a chief angel can do, or what their.
It's hard not to have this conversation without using the term angel incorrectly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I feel like we all do it. We're like, I'm going to say angel because I don't have a better word to use.
He's called a seraphim in the Bible, which is
a billet, not a creature, right?
And I think seraphim were creatures.
Well, we say that. I think not. As the more I see, the more I don't think that that's true. Like, I don't think that cherubim.
Okay, calm down, Farmers Insurance.
Well, seraphim are. Yeah, sorry, I thought I had something up, but you said the devil isn't mentioned in the Old Testament.
Correct.
He is actually. The devil. The term devil is from the Greek diabolos, which is the Greek word given to him. It means the same thing as Satan. It just means one who hurls accusations, and Satan does appear in the Old Testament, and it's scholars who are.
That also sounds like a billet to me. Like angel is a
messenger. That's the point that I'm making.
And a Satan is a Satan, so it could be. There could be 50 Satans. There could be 1,000 Satans.
That's exactly where I'm at.
Just like there's 1,000 lawyers.
Let me read something, and I think this will. A great sign appeared in heaven: a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven: an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tails swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And this is the important part. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them, but woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury. And then, but basically, I mean,
what chapters? Where is that?
That's Revelation 12.
That's the New Testament.
So
right.
I said it wasn't in the Old Testament.
Well, I was addressing the idea of there being multiple.
I thought you were going to tell me that was in Daniel or something. I was like, what?
No, I get that. And also seraphim is also described with 4 heads and a bunch of eyes. To me, that sounds like attributes and not necessarily a person. That sounds like there's symbolism there.
I see what you're saying
in all of that. So got it. There's a chaos dragon that is the one who leads astray. It doesn't mean it's a dude with 7 heads. It's attributes to whatever is filling that billet.
Well, there's a couple things going on there. One, it's not Daniel. It's a reference to Daniel chapter 7, where these 4 empires are described in terms of these beasts, and he kind of amalgamates them all. So like the whole thing about the 7 heads and that has symbolism.
There's literary function to that. It's not necessarily an anatomical description.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you distinguish between the literary function all the time? And this is part of our argument with Genesis 3:1 was that, okay, so there's all this literary function, but then you say that we have to bring the text straight forward. So here we are with another.
Well, I don't think you can bring anything in Revelation straightforward.
I disagree with both of you on that, on both of those points. But to answer your question, Dre, it's one thing when you're reading the start of the Bible. I mean, yes, you have to read it within the context of the culture, but you have to start with the face value meaning and then consider what they meant. But if you're talking about the very first chapters in the Bible, well, everything else builds on that. And so the reason I read that,
we're just that dragon with all kinds of heads and tails and.
Well, the text that follows after that, it takes all of these different concepts that have been referenced throughout the entire Bible. It mentions Satan, the devil, that ancient serpent. That's a reference to Genesis 3, and it's kind of tying them all together into this one figure. And Jesus himself talked about the devil as a singular person. So like I don't think that the Bible leaves that option open to us, but let's just say for the sake of argument that
why doesn't he have a name? Is it Voldemort or some shit? Like we see the one who shall not be named. Why doesn't the devil have a singular name?
Are you saying that's as an argument for him not being an individual person?
It's a thought that just crossed my mind here in real time.
Well, like I'm not sure what, like I think the text tells us it's a singular person. But I guess what I'm wondering is what does
every
it
singular
it doesn't matter. It only matters for me going back to the whole being on the level of God thing.
Right. So
because
every singular person has a name. Every one of them. What other thing has a symbol that's a singular person that's not named?
Well, I mean, some would say that his name is Lucifer, but
I think that's misreading some stuff too, but okay.
I think that I think it's a reasonable inference to draw from that passage, but I don't think
the problem with that passage is he calls him the morning star, and there's another time when Jesus is called the morning star.
Right.
So that's really weird.
Jesus is also compared to a serpent often. Or God is because of or Nahash. There's I'll find it.
The only thing I can think of when the snake wasn't used in a bad, ominous way.
Serpent.
was the whole thing with they were going across the desert and hold the snake up on the stick and stare at it.
Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted.
Yeah, and I think that was always a weird. That's like one of those weird outlier stories, right? Where it doesn't align to the other stuff. And I'm sure there's people that have come up with really, thoughtful circular logic around why it's different. To me, it's just an outlier. Sometimes I think some of these stories are designed the events happen just because they happened. I don't know that
kings, not Jesus. I take that.
Okay. But anyway, but Brian, you asked the question just specifically, why does it matter? It doesn't, broadly speaking. Like, I don't think it changes any of the theology. It doesn't change anything that matters. But often, as we do on this show, we dig into really like small little things, because if it's weird, it matters, right? And my only point is simply, if it's not a singular person, then it changes the level of ominousness of the enemy. Because I guess maybe it's the Marine in me, but you started this show with the premise that we're at war with these evil powers, right? And it's between us and them, not God, which means it's on us to win. But if we're going up against an almost God level opponent, it feels a little lopsided. You know what I mean? And if we're supposed to feel empowered through the Spirit to be able to take this war to the enemy, it's really strange to think we're going to, I don't want to go fight Galactus, right? Like how are we going to pull that off? Like, you know what I mean? I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah. And I think, of course, God doesn't just leave us to fight the devil on our own. But the point of the incarnation, I mean, that, God's entire plan for history is to essentially, the reason I word it that way is because it's typically thought among Christians that God fights this for us and we're just waiting for things to play out and we're just passive objects. God's
like, you got into this mess.
Yeah, and
and plus there's a bunch of Christians that think we don't have we don't have free will anyway, so we're just here to watch.
Yeah, which, by the way, and the reason I went back to Genesis 1 is the whole that passage from Genesis 12 that I think they kind of bookend the whole Bible and frame it in terms of this war. If Jesus' death and resurrection was of course the decisive event that turned the war in our favor. The reason that the devil lost his place in heaven was because of that. It talks about how people might home in on that and frame it as a war in heaven, but this is a specific point in history when the Messiah was born. Because of the Messiah and what Jesus did, then Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and they lost their place in heaven. And then the rest of the text says, the accuser of our brothers who accuses them before our God day and night has been hurled down. They, being our brothers, humans who belong to Jesus Christ, they triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And Paul talks about how his death on the cross disarmed the rulers and authorities, the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly realms. Basically, God can't just intervene and wipe the devil out on our behalf because the devil has a claim. If he does that, if he punishes the devil for what he did, he would be bound by his own justice to also destroy humanity with him. And so the war between
you sound almost just like Brian Godiva.
Your preacher?
Yeah. No. The author for those books, the Nephilim series.
Right.
Because that's essentially how that whole argument that religious or the divine courtroom battle was essentially that same argument you just made. My point is, I think you and Brian are dead on with that logic.
And there's this epic passage in in the book of Zechariah, and I think it's chapter 3, where the high priest Joshua, this is after they've come back from exile. They're still kind of divorced from God as his people. They I don't think they've built the temple yet, but the prophet has a vision of the high priest Joshua standing before the Lord, like in kind of a courtroom setting, in filthy garments, like he's like basically as the representative of God's people, he's just filthy with their sin. And the devil, and it said that Satan was standing at his right hand to accuse him, and the angel of Yahweh rebuked Satan, said, "The Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord rebuke you. This is not this man a burning wick snatched from the fire." But like you've got this picture of a courtroom setting, and it's not it's the devil accusing us before God, and we're filthy and soaked with sin. But you have a picture of the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ acting as advocate. Basically, like the takeaway is, we have this idea of God fighting the war for us, but it's really, he fights it through us, but it has to be us. We have to be fighting it. Like the whole point of becoming a man is because we couldn't do that. We couldn't accomplish what Jesus accomplished. But for him to accomplish it, he could have only done it as a representative of humanity, or it wouldn't have worked. And every time God intervened in history for grace, at least, and like to save humanity, he did it through a human agent. And that's kind of the point that we need to make, and we need to understand as the church. Lost my train of thought. I had two trains of thought, and I couldn't pick one, and then I forgot the
two trains leave Brian's brain and going 20 miles an hour.
Okay, so there's this episode it's a perfect illustration after when the Israelites sent the 12 spies into the promised land and they brought a report back that it's awesome, it's flowing with milk and honey. We got this big cluster of awesome grapes, but it's overrun with giants and they're going to kill us. So let's go back.
Never mind.
That doesn't sound so awesome.
And then except for Joshua and Caleb, they were like, no, we could take them. That's, God's with us. And so the 10 other spies kind of like soured the morale of the whole nation, and everyone's grumbling and complaining that, well, God just brought him here to, so our kids could be enslaved and they'd murder us, and this, it's hopeless. And then God said,
these Israelites, man,
yeah.
Does any group of people in the Bible piss you off more than those guys? Like, what are you guys doing?
Well, I mean, I can relate to them a lot. Sorry. Yeah, I don't think they're unique. I think they're kind of they're kind of basic human, but
they're weak AF.
Yeah. So
they're mid.
They need Marines and a positive mental attitude.
Yeah, so this is when God condemned them to wander the wilderness for 40 years. And
I'm sorry, bro. Hold on. You can relate to them? So you're telling me if God spoke to you directly and told you, hey, go over there, you wouldn't believe in that? You're like, whoa, God leads me.
I would like to think I would be the Joshua and Caleb in that situation.
I think they all should have. That's weak as hell.
But I think if we look at the Israelites as being uniquely bad, well, I think the church is kind of in the same boat.
No wonder we're losing this war.
But so basically, that's when he condemned them to wander the wilderness, and they're like, well, that sucks. We don't want to do that. Okay, we'll go fight. We'll go fight now. And then God's like, no, I'm not gonna. I already told you. I'm not going with you. You didn't trust me. I'm not gonna fight. I'm not gonna fight with you now. And so they decide to do it anyway, and they get their asses handed to them, and then they wind up wandering the wilderness in 40 years. But God had told them that, well, no, your children who you said would be slaves, they're the ones who are going to go in. And like the picture there is that, on their own, they can't do it. They without God helping them, they're sorry, I kicked the table and it shook the thing, but yeah, they can't do it in their power. Only with God can they do it, but God's not going to do it for them. Like they have to pick up their swords and go fight, trusting that God will fight through them, or it won't work. And then eventually he did, and they did defeat the giants that their parents were afraid of after the 40 years. But relating that to the church, we have this mentality that God's just going to go in and do the fight for us, and we're just here to wait to get the report that the promised land has been cleared of giants and enemies. Because we have that mindset, that's why we have transgenderism for children and legalized abortion, and that's why we just are, half of our government supports depravity and obscenity and evil, and they think it's virtuous. It's the church's job to do the fighting, basically. But we, when you hear preachers talk about how well, I don't participate in the culture wars, I just preach the gospel, and he doesn't get it.
Did you guys see the link I
shared
shared last night? Did you see the link I shared last night? The short of my pastor. You guys didn't see it?
Yeah.
He said,
I saw it
exactly that. Yeah, it was just funny because I was thinking about it when I saw it. Yeah, I know. I'm hotel internet. It was funny because I saw that clip on Instagram and I was like, oh, that's funny. This is literally Brian's little mini sermon every one of our episodes that he gets into when he gets to this point. So I thought it was super relevant to the to share into the chat. But yeah, I agree with you, and I think I had this thought. I had the weirdest thought. So I took Austin to see this concert. We're in the Enterprise Arena. The Enterprise rental car company is green, and it was sold out. Big crowd. And as you guys might imagine, Disturbed's out there. David Draymond's doing his thing, and he's got great control of the audience. Right, they're into it. He can raise his hand and everybody cheers, and he can direct the crowd and all of that. Right. And I remember at one point thinking, what if this guy was to use this level of crowd engagement and whatnot to like preach God to these people? Like, how freaking wild and powerful would that be? And I think that kind of tied into, the way we started this conversation about, Hollywood and all of that, and the war that we're losing and why we're losing it. I kind of overlaid that with the idea that, we've said it on here before. It was a meme that I saw somewhere, but, the devil never in the Bible said, follow me. The devil simply convinces man to follow themselves and to do what they want because it's enough to push them off the path of righteousness. And I find that to be fascinating. The devil said, bow down to me, to Jesus, but like, that's the only instance of that. Right. And that was different. But like even the snake in the garden didn't say, hey, follow me. He just said, nah, do what you want. Don't listen to him, old stodgy one. Like, you're not going to die. You'll be all right. Right. Like that's the devil's MO. And that battle, while, we can get into a secondary argument about Revelation and its literalness and all of that, I don't think anything about that verse that you read and talking about the final battle, I don't believe that the final battle is actually going to be a physical battle in the sense of a traditional warfare. I think it's the battle is what's happening, as you said earlier, Brian. This is that final battle, and it will be won, but it's going to be won through our hearts, not with swords and shields in a literal sense.
Yeah,
I think
in a practical sense,
the only way to beat the evil one is with the word of God. and the proof of his existence and the proof of his love, the proof of Christ's resurrection, the proof of, the power of the blood of the Lamb, right? Because that is what will win people over. And when the people are won over, the battle is won.
Yeah, I think that, in a very practical sense, what we're seeing is how we're losing the war, like and I've talked about this before, the way that we define, like, we're saved by grace through faith, like the gospel is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. And it talked about how the brethren triumphed over the dragon through the gospel. To state the obvious, the gospel is believing that God raised him from the dead, and thereby putting our faith and trust in God through Jesus Christ. The way that we define that, though, Christians are not by and large equipped to understand why that's true. They're told that, well, just believe. What does that mean to just believe? What they often mean is kind of being indoctrinated into a set of I think that if you can't explain from the evidence like why it's true, and it's not a function of how articulate you are or how clearly you reason, but God has revealed himself in a way that this is a historical event that has evidence for it, that it's something that we're supposed to know. I pointed this out before. We don't believe the resurrection happened because we have faith. We have faith because the resurrection happened. That's how the Bible lays it out. In 1 Peter 1:21, through Christ you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. When Paul spoke to the Athenians at Mars Hill in Acts 17, he concluded his sermon with, God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. Like, the resurrection is itself the proof. And like, all the evidence is there, and it's pretty simple and easy to argue if you just, learn it. And then the idea is you respond to this knowledge of God by putting your trust in him. And there's other arguments, like the moral argument, the cosmological, the teleological, that further kind of help you understand who God is. But the bottom line is that this is objectively true. It's something that you can teach people, you can show your work, and thereby strengthen your faith, thereby engender faith or strengthen what faith you have. Christians aren't really equipped for that. They're basically just, if you ask your garden variety Christian, why do they believe this? Well, it's because I put my faith in this. They can't really tell you why. So they can't really pass it on. But when you define faith that way as something that's kind of internal and impossible to define, and it's subjective, well, those are the same terms that a teenage boy will tell you, well, I believe I'm a girl. I feel very strongly that I'm a girl. And so we've kind of, the church itself has kind of established this standard of a belief being valid because you believe it so much.
Right. There's all these my truth.
My lived experience.
And
so I have a question then.
Well, but just to round that off, my whole point here is that Christians are unequipped to advance, not just to advance the gospel, but to address things like transgenderism on those terms, because they're kind of, that's the devil beating us by exploiting our own lack of understanding.
But let me ask this though.
Okay.
Are we at a turning point in the war?
Yeah, I think we are.
Because I mean, and this is going to sound like I'm equating this election to the war in spiritual, because I'm not. Like, Donald Trump is not our savior, right?
MAGA.
I don't think that
would be entirely wrong, but
my point is, that if you look at the boomer generation and the Gen X generation and the millennial generation, we didn't go as conservative as the ones behind us. So the youth, the 40 days in the wilderness, young people voted to the right more
Oh,
than,
I see what you're saying.
and young people are rejecting these untruths. Young people are rejecting council culture. Young people are the ones kind of taking over this thing. And whether it's counterculture or not, which, a lot of evidence says that it is, I think that they're moving the ball forward and less influence. And this election is kind of evidence for that, because you have somebody as influential as a Beyonce or Oprah Winfrey who says out loud, go vote for this person, and it didn't work. None of these influencers in these spheres that we talked about in the beginning of this episode are influencing us to do those things. The influencers are now individuals. They're now online. They're now TikTokers. And with sort of free speech in this space, without us fighting with one hand tied behind our back due to censorship, we are now able to win the war of ideas. And I think that there's where the tide can turn when, Donald Trump won a mandate basically fighting with his bare hands versus a guy with a knife and a blowtorch, because the media was on the other side, the athletes were on the other side, the actors were on the other side, all of the printed media, the television shows, everything is against him, yet he won the popular vote. And I think with just the American mandate of free speech, we can win these wars of ideas, and young people aren't as stupid as we would like to think they are.
I agree with you that these are all really great development. Like I've been giddy about just watching all of this.
I'm not saying we're winning. I'm just saying this is where the tide turns.
But
we're in a unique spot we need to take advantage of.
When an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order. Then it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. That is how it would be with this wicked generation. I think that's the danger that we're in right now. Like it's great to drive out an impure spirit, but if it's not replaced with the Spirit of God, then you wind up worse than you started. And the reason that applies here is, like, I agree with it, and I don't make a strict divorce between politics and religion. I think that this election was a spiritual battle. It's a battle over, it was a battle between good and evil, and good won, and that's great. But my concern is that
just a half a decade ago, you couldn't even mention God. So that word to get to young people, so we're saying that, if we don't replace it with something spiritual, then it's not going to hold. But we have to get to a point where we're allowed to say it out loud.
Absolutely, yeah.
Proudly, without being arrested, right? Like that clip Matt sent about the UK arresting people talking about God from America as soon as you enter their country.
Isn't that crazy?
Right? So that's why I think the tide is turning, because now is our opportunity.
I absolutely agree with that.
Okay.
But my concern is that people will take that opportunity and they're going to be like, yeah, that like, you hear people like Jordan Peterson, even atheists like Douglas Murray, and to an extent, Richard Dawkins, all acknowledging the social utility of Christianity, recognizing that like we need Christian values because it's better than Muslim values, and it's better than these these weirdo secular LGBTQ values. But my problem is that people are going to go to church and they're going to hear all of this kind of insipid life coaching and folk wisdom that's disguised as the word of God. And they're going to be, and like, they're not going to find like real spiritual life there. They're not going to be equipped to understand.
And then we're going to go right back to where we were.
Right. And it's probably going to, they're going to see Christianity as something they tried and failed. And then it's going to get worse.
Right. That's why you need to start cold calling Joe Rogan right now. As soon as you convert him, as soon as you actually put that last nail, like boom, the world will be okay. Like, I mean, we'll have Elon Musk and Joe Rogan being Christians, and
what I want to do is
so many people right now.
What I'd rather do is convert like professional pastors. That's who I want to convert.
I think that's a good spot. And I want to put this out to the listeners. Hey, we talked about a lot of stuff over a lot of different topics, trying to cover this one topic. Was there something we missed? Was there something you would have is there something you would have wanted to hear? Do you have a specific question to what we're talking about that you would like our take on? Because maybe we just passed over it. You know, we talked for 2 hours and clearly probably missed something, or you thought it was going in a direction as you're listening and it never got there.
Me too.
Let us know where there is. And
I got ideas, but I'll let the listeners
and maybe we'll have a follow-up / mailbag type episode asking, you know, hanging chads on some of our episodes. That's a George Bush Al Gore.
That's an old throwback
for you youngins.
They called them dangling chads in my day.
Is that what they call them? So yeah, please let us know. We talked about a lot of stuff over, you know, from Genesis to Revelation,
and Adam Sandler and LeBron James, and
so we're all over the place. Obviously, it's what we do. And maybe I can't think clearly because I had to shave my beard for these heathens. Matt Walsh would be so disappointed in me right now.
Yeah, well, people shouldn't put so much of their identity into their grooming status.
You guys have anything to add to
that? For now, I'm gonna leave it there.
Matt,
good.
Save rounds, Ra. All right, very well. With that, I will say, stay enlightened. What else do we say?
Stay curious.
We do say we should stay curious even more than enlightened. Anyway,
stay vaccinated. No, that's not
stay curious.
Don't get the measles.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, 500 people die of the measles, but 80,000 people die of diabetes. Okay, so sugar is more dangerous than fucking measles.
Well, first of all, no one's vaccinated against diabetes, and if you could be,
because we don't have to be, you just have to stop eating sugar.
Well, and yet they can't. You wouldn't get the measles if people just wash their hands.
But crazy.
So stay curious and enlightened, everyone.
God bless. We'll see you next week.
Bye.